It's great to see you here today, to come together in fellowship, even if it is through virtual fellowship. As I mentioned earlier, today is the first day in which we are beginning 5 weeks of exploring compassion in the scriptures. I'm imagining that we could all stand a bit of compassion in our lives right now, as there is so much loss and suffering happening. Loss of what was normal, loss of a sense of certainty, loss of physical contact with family and friends, loss of celebrations, loss of even family members, unfortunately for some, loss of a sense of safety, and even loss of gathering publicly to celebrate something like 4th of July. The good news is, and we hear in 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 4, it tells us that there is one who cares about what we are feeling and experiencing. He is the God, the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort that we ourselves have received from God above. Isn't it a comfort to know that we are not alone in what we are going through right now? That in spite of what it may feel like, God is with us and He cares for us down to the number of hair on our head. When we listen to stories, we can learn so much from the feelings of the people. This is one way that we learn about the Father's compassion for His Son in our gospel story today. In fact, we see, listen, and recognize what people are feeling, and this helps us to in turn feel their joy or even their hurt with them. Sometimes it requires a bit of imagination on our part because the story itself may not tell us directly what people are feeling, but we can get the gist of it. For example, we might focus on the younger brother and father in the story, but the older brother has something to show us as well. Compassion helps us to see how every human being is important, loved by God. So we've heard this story about a family party where everyone was celebrating around a meal, a fatted calf. But one of those members wasn't too happy about that party. As we focus in on compassion, it requires that we look at emotions. In our gospel story, it's full of emotions today. In fact, do you know that some expressions of emotion are actually contagious? Like when someone yawns. Have you caught my yawn yet? Now don't go to sleep. I have more to tell you. But the same is true with laughing and smiling, frowning and crying, and even anger as fear, and fear as we have seen across our country, how very contagious emotions can be. But the interesting thing is we can offer compassion to others as we have been offered compassion by God. When you see someone yawn or laugh or cry, something in your brain responds because you know what it feels like to laugh, to be sad, or even to be sleepy. This is in fact called empathy. And when we know what it is to feel something that others are feeling, we can become more compassionate towards one another. For example, if you see me stub my toe, You feel compassion for me because you know it hurts. You might first have empathy and go, ow, because you remember a time in which you stubbed your toe. But then, in fact, if you are moved strongly enough, you might offer to help me sit down, and that is an act of compassion. That is what compassion is. When you see my hurt and you feel my hurt with me, empathy, and then you're moved to help ease my hurt. I would say first by just simply acknowledging it. I see you're hurting. It may require action. But in order to show empathy, we need to see each other, truly see. For really seeing each other is the beginning of compassion. I would add that it involves suspending judgments and rationalizing. It's just seeing each other as human beings first and foremost. I have a friend who I was in seminary with who was instructed by his bishop to invite the neighbors that were most dangerous to them to dinner around a table, just as Jesus would invite his enemies to have a meal with, and even later his disciples. And the point of doing this was that something happens around a table. When we look into each other's eyes and hear each other's voices, we begin to understand what we have in common, how we are feeling. In this instance, my friend had invited a radical insurgent who had a Scud missile who lived next door. And as they both had their children playing together and they talked about what they wanted for their children and their hopes and dreams for their families and the generations to come, they realized they had more in common than they had separate. Do you know, by the end of that meal, they both had gained understanding of one another. So much so that that gentleman with the Scud missile said, "You're not who I thought I was fighting. I can't do this anymore." That's the power of coming to table, whether it is our welcoming others to our personal table at the kitchen or to the Lord's table of communion or our lunch table at school or even this digital online table, if you will. When we welcome people that are different from us, we're able to show more empathy. We're able to then show compassion. Our opening song today focused on how God invites everyone to the table of blessing. Everyone is included at God's table. So I invite you to think about who is it that you would like to include at God's table. For the beauty is that God welcomes all to his table, and we have all come to his table as family, not blood relatives, but spirit relatives. So as we see and welcome one another, we come to accept each other. When we gather together at the table, we also act as God acted in accepting one another. It takes intention and practice, recognizing and sharing feelings of others, as well as connecting with our own bodies and emotions. We're so quick to run past them. Through the parable of this father and his two sons, we witness how compassion empowers us to release any anger and judgment we may hold toward others and ourselves and the world for not being what we wanted or needed. We learn how compassion inspires seeing, forgiveness, and welcoming. I invite you to listen in on what are the emotions of that parable. The man had two sons. The younger brother greedily demands his inheritance, turned his back on his family and left them for a faraway country. He wasted all the money that he took from his family. Soon he became needy and hungry. Even though he felt ashamed, he decided to return home, hoping his father might welcome him back. When his father saw him, he was filled with compassion. He ran out to his son and threw open his arms and gathered him in. He was so happy that he was alive, not dead as he thought. So the father got a dinner together with the best of food and gave thanks, for this son was now safe, was alive. The older brother, coming in from the fields, tired from a hard day at work, heard the music and dancing and became very angry and refused to go in. When the father went to the older brother to persuade him to come in, he said, "I've listened to you and worked hard for you all these years, and you've never given me a party. But my brother comes back after wasting all his money, and you throw him a huge party?" The father said to him, "Son, I love you. You know what is mine is yours. But people matter more than possessions. We thought we lost your brother from our family, but he's now home. Come to the table and celebrate with us." I can't help but wonder, what did the father see in the son's return? What do you imagine the youngest son was feeling upon the return that the father felt too? Did you see what the father saw? Did it move you to compassion? I wonder, have you ever lost someone thinking they maybe were dead, only to get them back? What joy. How about that older brother? What did you see in him? What emotions were coloring his sight? What feelings did you feel when you heard the story? Sadness? Shame for that younger brother? Anger? Shock? Disappointment? Surprise? There's a myriad of possible emotions. But in this story, who is it that shows compassion? And who receives compassion? I wonder if the older brother ever came to the party. I wonder what he would have had to let go of in order to do so. Maybe his anger and resentment and jealousy, to lay those down. Maybe even his focus on things over people. I wonder who he would have sat with at the party if he was able to let go of those emotions and forgive his brother and father. Do you think he sat at the table with his dad and brother? If not, when would they have had another meal with each other? Who is it that sits with you at your dinner table, and what do you talk about? How do you welcome each other when someone's had a hard day and doesn't want to sit at the table? These are all opportunities for compassion is seeing and welcoming. I invite you this week to dare to try and see with eyes of compassion those you encounter along the way, those who are at your table each day. In fact, you might consider joining me in a little project, employing active imagination, and even imagine seeing Jesus in a chair at your table. Consider telling him about your day over a meal. Or in fact, you might be surprised what you hear and feel. Or you could call a friend and say, hey, can we have dinner over the phone together? For I know many of you are staying alone for your own safety. This compassion in action is meant to remind us of how we can be with one another so that in everything we make, do, or say, we feel Emmanuel, God with us. For in these silly, small, simple, tangible acts is an expression of the deep, wide compassion of God. I invite you to just see how it is that God is drawing us all together at this table of blessing. For the reality is that compassion helps us to see how every human being is important and loved by God. So before we move on to the rest of the service, I have a prayer I'd like to pray. Welcoming one, your warm, wide arms are always open, drawing us into your heart full of love. Thank you for forgiving us in your mercy. Now may you make our arms your arms, helping us see and welcome with compassion all those we meet. Amen.